안녕하세요. 오늘 꿈과 빛은 창작자들은 어떻게 연대할 수 있을까? 라는 질문에서 시작되었습니다. 이번 영상에선 국제미술감독 컬렉티브를 만든 인발 와인버그와의 인터뷰를 담았는데요. 이스라엘 출신의 미술감독인 인발은 서스페리아, 룸 넥스트 도어, 로스트 도터와 같은 작품으로 국제적 관심을 받기도 하였으며 지금도 현업을 병행하면서 1,500명이 넘는 전 세계 미술감독이 속해 있는 국제미술감독 위크를 운영하고 있습니다. 이 조합에 가입된 한국 미술감독님은 아직 한 명뿐인데요. 인발과 함께 조합의 시작, 한국 미술에 대한 국제적 관심, 창작자들의 연대, AI로 변해가는 시장에 대해 이야기 나누었습니다. 봉준호 감독은 말했죠. 1인치 정도 되는 자막의 장벽을 넘어서면은 훨씬 더 많은 훌륭한 영화들을 만날 수 있습니다. 우리에게 넘어야 할 장벽이 있을까요? 자신을 긍정주의자라고 표현하는 인발과의 기분 좋은 인터뷰의 시간에 여러분을 초대합니다. 만나서 반갑습니다. 한국 미술감독에게 짧은 소개를 해주실 수 있나요?
Absolutely. My name is Inbal Weinberg. I'm a production designer, originally born in Israel, and I live in New York. I work all over the world. And 10 years ago, my colleague Kalina Ivanov and I decided to start this collective of production designers. It was an idea that came from a very small circle of friends in New York. We thought we love connecting with colleagues who also happen to be our friends. Every time we meet informally, there's such a beautiful flow of ideas. Why not make it into a real collective, a society, a group? And we sent, I believe, maybe 30 emails to our close friends around the US and started organizing. And now 10 years later, we have 1,500 members from all over the world. Kind of amazing to see how much the community has grown and how far it has reached in every continent. And we do a lot of events. We do live events, online sessions, meetups, panels, and so on. So it's become almost a full-time job. And it's been a very fulfilling journey so far.
현직 미술감독으로 일하면서 조합을 이끄는 게 벅차지 않아요?
You know, it is a very difficult job. I think that our collective has become more successful than its structure allows because we're really a nonprofit organization. We just have a few volunteers that help us. But in the last few years, we introduced two very large events. One is a conference that happens every 2 years, and one is an international festival that is happening this year. So we sort of grew exponentially. It's a lot of juggling, and we really ask members to help. We're blessed with a very positive community that has a lot of goodwill. And I personally believe that production designers are excellent at organizing. Obviously, it's one of the skills you need to have in order to be good at your job. The problem, of course, is I'm sure it's the same in Korea. When you start a job, you basically disappear from the universe and you're working 24/7. You could barely find the time to even talk to your family, let alone spend time helping your community. But I have found over the years that it has been a very gratifying time to spend because, especially when I work in movies, because let's say I'm going through a really rough week, and then on the weekend, I am meeting with colleagues through the collective. It's always such a comforting thing to know that everyone is struggling through the same things that I'm struggling through, or being able to ask advice from colleagues or read what other colleagues are recommending. So I have found it a very fulfilling second full-time job. But we are hoping to have a structure where our members are more engaged so that we can all work together to expand the collective over the next few years.
조합에 한국 미술감독은 단 한 명만 있는 게 아쉬웠다. 워낙 바쁘기도 하지만 자신의 일을 공유하는 문화에 익숙하지 않은데 어떻게 하면 좋을까?
I understand where that kind of, let's say, attitude is coming from. First of all, language is always a barrier. And since we choose to have most of our events in English, we make it harder for people from other cultures to participate. So that's something that I would say is our responsibility, to be able to reach out more, figure out some translation services, understand how to share in other languages as well. Second is, of course, I would say there are culture gaps that are perhaps difficult for us to know when we're reaching out to other communities. So that's why we're looking always for people like yourself, which are sort of can be a bridge between various communities in order to at least introduce ourselves and make the first few steps with a new community. But what I would say to your question particularly is, I think that it's hard sometimes to be okay with sharing knowledge because you perhaps feel like you have worked so hard to get yourself to a certain place in your career, and you've done it probably through a lot of work, investing your own time, learning, going to school. And so that is your power, right? Your knowledge is your power. And you fear that if you let go of any of that, you will be less powerful. I understand that tendency, and I also think, for sure, for example, in times where there's crisis in the industry, which at the moment there is a crisis in the industry, people are even more concerned because there's less work to share around. I have found, though, that it's a baseless fear because over 10 years of talking to colleagues and listening to many, many, many amazing colleagues share ideas, I have never seen it hurt anyone. In fact, I would say it's the opposite because it's an exchange, like a two-way street. You share knowledge and you receive knowledge. And so the things you're receiving are really enriching you. I think that a lot of times people are worried, how should I say it? I think that at the end of the day, what I truly believe is at the end of the day, your character is actually what gets you the job, not your knowledge or where you went to school or how great you are at drafting. It's really your personality, which is a mix of all of those things. And so being concerned about sharing is sort of irrelevant because whatever happens, you're going to get the job you are destined for, and somebody else is going to get another job that they're destined for, and we can never control the universe, and therefore we will be stronger if we are part of a larger community. And the last thing I would say to that is that I believe probably that in Korea, as in the rest of the world, production design or art direction is perhaps how should I say it, an invisible art. A lot of times our colleagues reference the fact that it's hard to explain what we do. We need to advocate for our place in the filmmaking process more. And I see that issue across cultures, across communities, countries. It tends to be the first thing that production designers would want to discuss is how to make our voice heard, how to gain more visibility. And so by sharing and by joining a community, making the community grow and exchanging internationally, we're actually advocating for our entire profession. And so in the end, you're maybe sharing with a small group, but the effect of that, the ripple effect of that will end up advocating for you and your job.
오, 행사를 가보지 못해서 무척 궁금한데요. 실제로 한 장소에서 만나니까 예상하지 못했던 결과가 있었나요?
Thank you for that question. I would love to answer it. So in 2022, in 2022, we realized a dream we've had for a long time, which was a conference for production designers. And we had thought of that idea for years, but finally decided to do it, especially after the pandemic, because, you know, the pandemic created this void and people really were hungry to meet in person. However, we didn't want the conference to be a kind of a buttoned up, strict, serious conference about technical things. We wanted it to be a little bit like a retreat where, yes, we can speak about technical things, but we can also speak about mental health issues or creativity or how to work with your department. So we decided it was definitely a bit of a risk, but we decided to go on this journey and travel together to a small island in Greece. We persuaded some very, very high-profile designers to join us. And so after months of preparations, we ended up with 250 production designers from around the world traveling on a boat to an island. And we spent 4 days there. We have now done a second edition, and we plan to do an edition every 2 years. So next year will be our next edition. So the way that we spend our time on the island is that we have panels in a large auditorium every day where you hear, you know, Academy Award-winning production designers speak about topics from creativity to well-being, sustainability. There's much to discuss. And then in the afternoon, we have smaller workshops that people could choose between so that the conversation's a bit more intimate. And what is really important to us is the continual communal experience. So we have lunches together. We have really big dinners together every night. We have a party, opening night reception. So a lot of opportunities for people to speak also off record. And that has been actually the sort of most successful part of it, I think, is the kind of minute communication moments between everybody that joins. And what happens is you have very experienced designers, and you have designers who have just started, you have students, you have production design professors. And so the mix of energy is really strong. And I think that what I was surprised by, because we always figured, oh, it's going to be a really great professional event. What I was surprised by in the first gathering, which happened again in the second, is the powerful emotional journey that people go on during these few days. I mean, people, the emails we receive afterwards are amazing. People cry a lot. People say it's one of the highlights of their lives. And I think that I underestimated how difficult our industry can be and how lonely. And I think a lot of designers struggle with the uncertainty of the job, maybe a feeling of inferiority, maybe imposter syndrome. There's a lot of kind of deeper mental health, perhaps I would even say, issues that sort of infiltrate our day-to-day when we work. And the coming together was actually like a boost of well-being to everybody. So that's what was so touching, seeing colleagues really basically understand a healthier way to be in our profession. And then as we returned, people really put that to use. And since the first gathering, a few associations were started, more people are engaged in doing events and speaking about production design and well-being and so on. So I feel like it's a spirit that just keeps going and expanding. And we hope to do this event for years to come, but hopefully with more participants from Korea, since So far, we have had none.
그리스 섬에서 수백 몇 채 미술 감독이 모이는 행사라니 정말 아찔하게 재밌을 것 같은데요. 정보나 기술을 교류하는 것 말고는 어떤 일이 중요한가요? 아무래도 노동 환경에 대해서도 이야기하겠죠.
I'm glad you're bringing up work conditions. Even though we, as an organization, we try to be apolitical because we're a global organization and you don't really want to get into territorial issues because we don't know much about each territory. But we hosted a really powerful panel in our first gathering, which was called Production Designers United. And the panel had representatives from various associations around the world. We had a member from the Art Directors Guild, who is one of the more powerful guilds. And in the US, we have really, really powerful unions. And so the standards for work conditions are fairly high in comparison with some other countries. And so it was a beautiful exchange in which I felt like, oh, there is such a great potential here for associations that have been, I think the Art Directors Guild started in like 1927, right? So there are associations that have been around for so long and have a lot to share, have real understanding of contracts, of work condition stipulations, how to organize, how to unionize. And so having that knowledge be passed around could be very helpful. And so, you know, we try not to get involved, but we love to give the platform for people to speak and exchange knowledge in the hope that younger associations or maybe countries with poorer work conditions could get ideas and be inspired.
한국 콘텐츠가 각광을 받으면서 시장이 커졌지만 우리는 걱정이 많습니다. 한국 미술 시장을 외부에선 어떻게 바라보나요?
I will actually prefer to answer for the community because I know that there's a lot of designers in our collective who are really, really intrigued by, I mean, the more visible projects that for sure as of, I mean, I personally have watched the behind the scenes video of Parasite many times to see the bit how, you know, the flood scene and how that was built in the studio. And so I think things like that, you know, Squid Game and so on, those really pique everyone's interest. I think the reason is because you realize that there is a very strong community that is very creative, but was created in a kind of vacuum from the Hollywood system, right? So a community has gotten, it's like there are other communities like that, like Bollywood, for example, where Western designers are just in awe because it got started completely different than how we're used to making films. And it has a lot of unusual, what would seem to Western designers as unusual work structures, unusual creative workflows. And so I think everyone is really intrigued to kind of learn from a system that wasn't formed based on a Hollywood system. So I would say that to me, I would love to know more about the structure and how things happen because I'm always intrigued by different cultures. I am also from a different culture. I'm not American. And so it's obvious to me that beautiful things happen around the world in many different ways. And I think it's really energizing to learn about different ways of doing things. And in fact, we were speaking a lot with, I was speaking a lot with Mara Lapierre-Schloop, who is the production designer of Pachinko, who worked in South Korea and is a very large production. And she has so many wonderful stories about the cultural difference that she experienced working in Korea and that she learned so much from it. So I feel like that would be the case for any exchange of ideas. And then lastly, I want to say that the projects that are visible that have come in the last few years from Korea are kind of wild creatively, right? I mean, I just think of Old Boy. Old Boy is quoted all the time for its incredible visuals. by many members and websites and Instagram accounts and so on. And so to understand where that sort of wildness comes from would be just really interesting for designers. I think we're always looking for fresh ideas. And I think today, especially with the kind of global social media, Pinterest universe, everything becomes a pale copy of something else. And there's less and less creativity. And I think we are looking for sources of inspiration. So learning from a community that is maybe a bit isolated and has created its own universe would be beneficial to all of us.
한국 시장만으로는 한계를 느끼고 있습니다. 그러나 국내 미술 감독이 해외로 진출하는 것에 대한 심리적 부담이 있습니다. 해외 경험이 없어도 어떻게 할 수 있을까요?
Of course, I understand. Well, luckily nowadays, I would say we have probably the most amount of resources up to now that have existed in the world's history at our fingertips, right? So even when I started back home, it was kind of pre-internet. You could barely find any information. I had to go to the library and look at old books. And nowadays, there's so much that's available to us for any subject, really. So that's already a great point, that if you're curious and you do a little bit more serious research than just Google search, then you can find many resources. We definitely, in the collective, we try to be a serious resource as well. On our website, we publish a lot of content about production design. We reach out to designers to ask them about their work. We do sessions that are open to everybody and about a lot of different subjects. We do sessions about new technology like AI, VFX. We do sessions with young students to talk about their next career step. So I invite anybody that's listening also to follow us on Instagram and check out our sessions and join when it's open to the public and so on. I would say in general, I mean, if someone is more serious about an international career, probably a great step would be to take a course or go to university abroad. It's sort of a very serious decision, but also probably the one that would get you the closest to being able to work abroad. But I would also think, imagine that an international production came to South Korea, wouldn't you want to excel, right? So I imagine that language skills are always very, very good to have. And I think in general, regardless of where you're from, any knowledge of new technology is always helpful, because that's usually what gets you at least your first step, your first foot in the door. And I love talking to my crew about movies and knowing that, you know, even my assistants are just, they love movies. They're movie buffs. So I would tell anyone who's starting out to watch a lot of films, and not just Korean films, but any films. Check out whatever is happening in festivals across the world, know what is artistically happening. And to expand on that, I would even say just absorb art in any form, right? Fine arts, photography, painting, sculpture, and again, not just from your local community, but as global as possible. At the same time, I think that probably the strength of someone who's coming from Korea is that they are aware of local culture, local customs, local crafts, and that is what makes that person unique versus another person. So I would say also, of course, embrace and celebrate your culture, even if you are working abroad or you have the opportunity to be a guest in another culture. You're bringing your culture with you. So in a perfect universe, there is a kind of embracing of the mix of cultures wherever you are.
AI의 시대가 오면서 시장이 빠르게 변하는 듯합니다. 그럼에도 우리가 지켜야 할 프로덕션 디자인의 본질은 무엇인가요?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a a relevant question because at this moment there is a global crisis. It's interesting to know that Korea has its own version of the crisis, but I am talking to colleagues every day from various countries, and I don't know one country that has escaped this current sort of downsizing in work. And I think you are exactly correct. I've noticed it in many other communities, as well as mine in New York, that during the pandemic, after the first couple of months where everything halted, everything just turbo timed and everyone was working and people were snatched off the street to work, and many people entered the market who right now are probably unemployed. And so it has been a strange boom and bust time. And I would say we are probably right now in the second year of this crisis. As I'm an optimist in my character and a positive person, I kind of choose to look at this as a pendulum. Like, our industry is really agile and very unforeseen. And I believe it's probably always been that way from when it was first started. And obviously, we know that because our own lives are uncertain from being freelancers in this industry. And so it is a kind of, I think, workflow of ebbs and flows. So I'm telling myself, okay, like right now is down, there will be an up, things are always changing. The one thing I know is that people are going to continue to watch narratives forever and ever and ever, because it was like that in the cave days, and it's going to be like that also when we're all talking to robots. So I would say the essence of the work is there. People are going to watch things playing out on screens. How we can be part of that perhaps will change, and we'll have to adapt. And I think it's always very, very helpful to be hip to whatever new technology is being released as the huge disruptor of the moment, and try to always expand your skill set. I mean, I think that's true about anything. Even if you went back and studied hand drawing right now, it would still expand your skill set. And I mean, when I employ people in my art department, I certainly look for people who are aware of new technology and know how to use it. I'm sure my directors also look for that in me, right? So I would say it's extremely helpful to engage in whatever is happening right now, definitely AI and virtual production. And in fact, if you are unemployed, it is a perfect time to start like learning a skill more seriously, because it's one thing to just like listen to a session about AI, but it's another thing to actually sign up for one of the AI services and actually be prompting every day, like a course, or I'm sure there are courses now in AI, same in virtual production. So we should maybe make the most of our unemployed time in kind of preparing ourselves for whatever our next job will be. I have led a lot of sessions and panels about, unemployed time, because I think that what happens in our industry, which is unfortunate but kind of unavoidable, is that because most of the time it is also our passion, we tend to confuse work and life. And when you are not working, you're sort of unable to practice your passion. And so it has an emotional toll on you. So it's not just that, okay, I'm not working, I'm not making money. It's actually like I am not fulfilling my artistic vocation in life. And so there, some of it is really about thinking, kind of thinking differently, reframing how you use your time between projects, so that you don't kind of go into that darker place of depression or feeling less worth, because you are not currently practicing your art. And so I think it's a very sort of proactive thing to start looking into what technologies happen. And In fact, what I do sometimes in my free time is I try to learn about other professions that are connected to mine. For example, VFX, coloring, cinematography. And so, of course, when I'm working, I want to know more, but I'm so busy that I don't have the time. When I'm off, I can go to friends' VFX houses and sit down and ask, about specific things, or visit a coloring suite and see, just this is the time where you can kind of learn more about what your colleagues are doing, so that when you are working on your next film, you'll be able to converse and communicate with your creative collaborators.
그렇겠네요. 모두 다 잘 들었습니다. 오늘 우리의 대화가 교류의 중요성을 보여주는 듯 합니다. 전 세계 프로덕션 디자이너가 비슷한 고민을 갖고 연대하고 또 묵묵히 길을 가고 있다는 사실이 위안이 되는데요. 인발 대표님, 오늘 시간에 무척 감사드립니다.
It's a real honor. Thank you. But hopefully with more participants from Korea, since so far we have had none.